Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Homecoming. Master Sergeant Cole Brennan's boots hit American soil for the first time in 18 months. The Afghanistan deployment had been brutal. 3 firefights, 2 IED explosions that still echoed in his dreams, and countless nights wondering if he'd ever see his family again. At 34, Cole had served 4 tours, each one carving deeper lines into his weathered face and harder edges into his soul. He'd been the kind of soldier other soldiers respected and enemies feared. In Kandahar, they called him the Wolf, not for his aggression, but for his patience. Cole could wait days for the perfect shot, weeks to spring the perfect trap. He never acted on emotion. Every move was calculated, every decision measured against long-term consequences. The taxi pulled up to his modest ranch house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Cole had bought the property specifically for its isolation. 3 acres surrounded by cornfields, the nearest neighbor half a mile away. Privacy had always been important to him, a lesson learned growing up with an abusive stepfather who taught him that walls had ears and help rarely came to those who needed it most. As he paid the driver, Cole noticed the lawn needed cutting and paint was peeling from the porch railings. Strange. His wife Linda had always been meticulous about appearances. During their video calls, she'd mentioned being busy with volunteer work and her 5-year-old son Tommy's activities, but she'd never mentioned letting the house go. Cole hefted his duffel bag and walked to the front door. His key still worked, but something felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. The living room had been rearranged. New furniture, expensive-looking leather pieces that Cole knew they couldn't afford on military pay and Linda's part-time nurse salary. A massive flat-screen TV dominated one wall, and Cole spotted a gaming console that definitely hadn't been there when he left. Linda? Tommy? His voice echoed through the house. No answer. It was 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Tommy should be in kindergarten, but Linda should be home between her shifts at the county hospital. Cole moved through the house methodically, the way he'd clear buildings in hostile territory. Master bedroom. The bed was unmade, and he found men's clothes in the closet that weren't his. Size large, expensive brands. In the bathroom, a second toothbrush and cologne that smelled like something Tommy's rich grandfather might wear. Cole's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. In the military, you learned to compartmentalize. Emotion was the enemy of good judgment. He'd investigate first, react later. The kitchen revealed more evidence. 2 coffee cups in the sink, lipstick on one rim. A grocery receipt on the counter showing expensive steaks, wine, and craft beer, brands Linda had never bought before. The refrigerator was covered with Tommy's drawings, but several showed stick figures that made Cole's blood run cold. A man, a woman, and a small boy, with the words "New Daddy" written in crayon. Cole found Linda's note on the kitchen table, probably left there in a hurry, taking Tommy to therapy appointment. Back by 5. Call first. Don't want to interrupt if we're running late. L. Therapy appointment? Tommy had never needed therapy before Cole deployed. The boy had been happy, healthy, excited about starting school. Cole pulled out his phone and called Linda's number. It went straight to voicemail. He spent the next 2 hours conducting reconnaissance. Linda's laptop was password protected now. It hadn't been before. Credit card statements showed charges at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Des Moines, purchases at jewelry stores. The garage revealed the biggest shock. Linda's old Honda was gone, replaced by a gleaming black BMW with temporary tags. Cole photographed everything with military precision, cataloging evidence like he'd done in countless intelligence reports. Whatever was happening here had been going on for months, maybe longer. The question was, who was the man, and where was his son? At 3:30, Cole heard a car door slam. Through the kitchen window, he watched a silver Porsche pull into the driveway. A man emerged, tall, lean, probably 40, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Cole made in a month. The man walked to the front door like he owned the place, using a key Cole had never seen before. Cole positioned himself in the hallway shadows and waited. The man entered, calling out, Linda? I grabbed some wine for tonight. He had an educated voice, confident, used to getting what he wanted. When the man rounded the corner into the kitchen, Cole stepped into view. She's not here. The man jumped, dropping a bottle of wine that shattered on the tile floor. Jesus, who are you? How did you get in here? I live here. Cole's voice was perfectly calm, but his eyes held the same cold focus that had unnerved enemy combatants half a world away. The question is, who are you? The man straightened his tie, trying to recover his composure. I'm Dr. Richard Hawthorne. I'm dating Linda. She didn't mention you were. I thought you were overseas. Dating? Cole let the word hang in the air. In my house. In my bed. Around my son. Dr. Hawthorne's face flushed. Look, I don't know what Linda told you, but we're adults here. These things happen. Maybe we should wait for her to get back and discuss this civilized dash. Where's my son? He's with Linda. They should be back soon. Hawthorne glanced toward the door, clearly calculating whether he could make it outside before Cole could stop him. Cole read the man's body language like a book. In Afghanistan, that skill had kept him alive. Here, it told him everything he needed to know about Dr. Richard Hawthorne. Guilty conscience, weak under pressure, used to talking his way out of problems rather than fighting his way out. I'll wait, Cole said simply. The next hour passed in tense silence. Hawthorne made nervous small talk that Cole ignored. Finally, at 4:45, Linda's BMW pulled up. Cole watched through the window as his wife emerged from the driver's seat. She looked different. Designer clothes, professional manicure, hairstyled in a way that would have cost half their monthly grocery budget when he left. Tommy climbed out of the back seat, and Cole's heart clenched. His son had grown taller, but he seemed smaller somehow. The confident, laughing boy Cole remembered had been replaced by someone who kept his head down and moved carefully, like he was afraid of making noise. Linda walked through the front door first, chattering to Tommy about homework and dinner plans. She stopped dead when she saw Cole standing in the living room. Cole. Her face went white. You didn't call. The deployment isn't supposed to end until next month. Change of plans. Cole kept his voice level. We need to talk. Tommy looked up then, and Cole saw what made his soldiers' training useless. His son's left eye was blackened, partially swollen shut. Fresh bruises marked his small arms. When Tommy saw his father, he didn't run for a hug like he used to. Instead, he stepped closer to Linda, seeking protection from his own father. Tommy. Cole knelt down, but his son flinched backward. I'm sorry, Daddy, Tommy whispered. I try to be good. I promise I tried. Cole looked up at Linda, then at Hawthorne, who had appeared in the doorway behind them. In that moment, 18 months of combat, discipline crystallized into something far more dangerous than military training. Pure, focused hatred. Chapter 2. The Truth Unveiled. That evening, after Hawthorne had made a hasty exit and Linda had put Tommy to bed with nervous efficiency, Cole sat at his kitchen table like a man planning a military operation, which in many ways he was. Linda paced by the windows, chain-smoking cigarettes, a habit she'd picked up since he left. You can't just show up unannounced and expect everything to be the same, Cole. People change. Situations evolve. Situations evolve. Cole repeated the phrase without emotion. Is that what you call it? Don't take that tone with me. You've been gone for a year and a half. I had needs, Cole. I was lonely, and Richard was there for me when you weren't. Cole stood up slowly. In a lamplight, Linda could see the changes 18 months of war had carved in her husband. He'd always been lean and hard, but now he looked like a weapon that had been honed to its sharpest edge. The boy she'd married at 22 was gone, replaced by something that made her nervous in ways she couldn't articulate. Tell me about Tommy's bruises. Linda's cigarette trembled between her fingers. He's been acting out. Behavioral problems since you left. The school recommended therapy, and Dr. Peterson said it was normal for children to test boundaries when a parent deploys. Dr. Peterson? Cole pulled out his phone and showed her the note she'd left. You said therapy appointment. The note didn't mention a name. Linda's face flushed. Dr. Peterson. Dr. Hawthorne. Richard helps with Tommy sometimes. He's good with children. He's a pediatric surgeon, Cole. He knows how to handle difficult situations. Difficult situations that require bruising a 5-year-old. Tommy fell off his bike last week. Boys get hurt, Cole. You'd know that if you'd been here. Cole studied his wife's face with the same intensity he'd once used to spot insurgent activity. Linda had never been a good liar, but she'd certainly had time of practice. Show me his bike. What? Tommy's bike. If he crashed hard enough to blacken his eye and bruise his arms, there should be damage to the bicycle. Linda stubbed out her cigarette with more force than necessary. I don't have to prove anything to you. This is my house too, and Richard is my guest. Richard is your guest in my bed, around my son, spending money we don't have on things we don't need. Cole's voice remained calm, but Linda recognized the dangerous stillness that had always preceded his worst anger. And somehow, during this arrangement, Tommy has learned to flinch when adults move too quickly. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. 18 months of single parenting, wondering if you were coming home in a box, trying to hold everything together, Did you take him to a real doctor for those bruises? Linda faltered. Richard looked at them. He said they weren't serious. Richard, who conveniently happens to be a doctor and your boyfriend. Cole moved closer, and Linda instinctively stepped backward. Very convenient. Don't you dare imply that Richard would hurt Tommy. He loves that boy like his own son. His own son. Cole repeated the words with deadly quiet. The way Tommy drew pictures of his new daddy. The way he flinches when I try to touch him. The way he apologizes for trying to be good. Linda's composure cracked. Maybe if you'd been here, instead of playing soldier across the world, Tommy wouldn't be so confused about father figures. Cole absorbed the blow without reaction. In combat, you learn to ignore pain until the mission was complete. Where were you this afternoon? Really? I told you. Therapy. With Dr. Peterson or Dr. Hawthorne? Linda's silence stretched too long. Cole waited, using the interview techniques he'd learned in intelligence gathering. Most people couldn't tolerate extended silence. They'd fill it with words that revealed more than they intended. Richard was helping, Linda finally said. Tommy has been having nightmares, acting aggressive at school. Richard thought a session with a child psychologist might help. What kind of nightmares? Bad dreams about monsters. Children have nightmares, Cole. What kind of monsters? Linda lit another cigarette with shaking hands. I don't interrogate our 5-year-old about his dreams. Maybe you should ask him yourself. Cole nodded slowly. I intend to. He found Tommy's room dark, except for a nightlight shaped like a superhero. His son was awake, staring at the ceiling with the wide-eyed alertness Cole recognized from soldiers suffering from hypervigilance. Hey, buddy. Cole sat on the edge of the bed, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle the boy. Tommy turned toward him, but didn't speak. I missed you while I was gone. Mommy said you might not come back. She said soldiers sometimes don't come home. I came back. I promised I would, remember? Tommy nodded solemnly. Uncle Richard said promises don't always matter. He said sometimes people leave even when they promise to stay. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. Uncle Richard said that. He's not really my uncle. But Mommy says I have to call him that, or new daddy when people ask. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't like calling him new daddy. Why not? Tommy was quiet for so long that Cole thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, in a voice so small it was barely audible, new daddies are supposed to be nice. But Uncle Richard gets angry when I don't do what he wants. What happens when he gets angry? He uses his mean voice. And sometimes he grabs too hard. Tommy rolled up his pajama sleeve, showing finger-shaped bruises on his thin arm. But Mommy says it's okay because he's trying to teach me to be a good boy. Cole's vision tunneled. In Afghanistan, this feeling had preceded some of his most lethal decisions. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and the enemy wasn't some faceless insurgent. This was his home, his family, his son. Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're a good boy. You've always been a good boy. And no one has the right to hurt you for any reason. Do you understand? Tommy nodded, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. I'm going to fix this, Cole whispered, pulling his son into a gentle hug. Daddy's going to make sure no one hurts you ever again. As Tommy finally fell asleep in his arms, Cole stared out the window at the Iowa darkness and began planning. In the military, They called it mission planning. In the civilian world, some might call it revenge. Cole called it justice. Chapter 3. Setting the Stage. The next morning, Cole woke before dawn and conducted the most important reconnaissance mission of his life. While Linda and Tommy slept, he systematically searched every inch of the house, photographing evidence and documenting the scope of what had been happening in his absence. In Linda's jewelry box, he found pieces worth thousands of dollars: diamond earrings, a gold bracelet, a necklace that looked like something from an expensive boutique. Hidden beneath her lingerie, he discovered credit cards and names he didn't recognize and bank statements showing deposits that dwarfed her nurse's salary. The real treasure trove was Linda's laptop. Her password was Tommy's birthday. She'd always been predictable that way. Cole's military intelligence training made quick work of recovering deleted files and browsing history. What he found made his blood run cold. Text messages between Linda and Richard dating back 14 months, 2 months after Cole's deployment began. The early messages were flirtatious, then sexual, then increasingly domestic. Richard had been paying for everything: the BMW, the furniture, Linda's shopping sprees, even Tommy's school expenses. But the most damning evidence was in Linda's email drafts. Messages she'd written but never sent, probably in moments of guilt or doubt. "I don't know what to do about Tommy. He keeps asking when Cole is coming home, and Richard is losing patience with him. Yesterday, he grabbed Tommy so hard he left marks, and I didn't say anything. I'm turning into someone I don't recognize. Richard says Tommy needs to learn respect, but I think he's just jealous of how much Tommy misses his real father." I caught Richard going through Cole's things in the garage, throwing away pictures and medals. When I asked why, he said we needed to help Tommy move forward. Tommy wet the bed again last night. When Richard found out this morning, he made Tommy clean it up himself and wouldn't let him eat breakfast. I wanted to intervene, but Richard said I was too soft. That's why Tommy has behavior problems. I hate myself for agreeing with him. Cole photographed everything, uploaded files to a secure cloud account, and created detailed documentation that would have impressed his intelligence officers. Then he began researching Dr. Richard Hawthorne. Richard Hawthorne, 39, pediatric surgeon at Iowa Methodist Hospital. Divorced 3 years prior after his wife accused him of emotional abuse. Charges that were dropped when she suddenly withdrew her complaint and moved out of state with a substantial financial settlement. No children from his marriage, despite being a children's doctor. 2 previous malpractice suits, both settled out of court with sealed records. Cole dug deeper, using contacts from his intelligence days to access information that wasn't publicly available. Richard Hawthorne had a pattern: targeting vulnerable women with children, insinuating himself into their lives with money and manipulation, then gradually asserting control over both mother and children. The previous wife had documented instances where Richard had disciplined her young nephew during family visits, but nothing had ever gone to trial. By the time Linda woke up, Cole had assembled a complete picture of the man who had been living in his house and hurting his son. He'd also formulated a plan that would ensure Dr. Richard Hawthorne never hurt another child again. Linda found him in the kitchen, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee as if nothing had changed. "You're up early," she said nervously. Military habit. Cole didn't look up from the paper. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." Linda poured herself coffee with hands that shook slightly. "And I think you're right. People change. Situations evolve." Cole folded the newspaper and met her eyes. "I need to adapt to the new reality." Linda blinked in surprise. She'd expected anger, accusations, demands. This calm acceptance was somehow more unsettling. "I'd like to meet Richard properly," Cole continued. "Have dinner together, talk like adults. If he's going to be part of Tommy's life, we should establish boundaries and expectations." "You want to have dinner with Richard?" "I want to understand what I'm dealing with," Cole said truthfully. "And I think he should understand what he's dealing with too." Linda looked skeptical but hopeful. "He was planning to come over tonight anyway. I could cook something nice, and we could all sit down together." "Perfect." Cole smiled, and Linda relaxed for the first time since he'd returned. She had no way of knowing that the smile was the same one Cole used right before springing a carefully planned ambush. That afternoon, Cole took Tommy to the park while Linda prepared dinner. Away from the house and Richard's influence, Tommy began to relax and act more like the child Cole remembered. They played on the swings, threw a baseball, and talked about kindergarten and friends and all the normal things a 5-year-old should be excited about. "Daddy," Tommy asked as they sat on a bench sharing ice cream, "are you going to go away again?" "Not for a long time, buddy. Daddy's going to be here to take care of you." "What about Uncle Richard?" "Mommy says he takes care of us now." Cole chose his words carefully. "Uncle Richard has been helping Mommy while I was gone, and that was nice of him. But I'm back now, so things are going to change." "Good," Tommy said simply. "I like it better when it's just you and Mommy and me." That evening, Richard Hawthorne arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, carrying flowers for Linda and an expensive toy for Tommy, a remote-controlled helicopter that probably cost more than the family's weekly grocery budget. Cole watched from the kitchen as Richard interacted with his son. The man was smooth, charming, practiced in the art of winning over children with expensive gifts and exaggerated attention. But Cole noticed the subtle signs of control, how Richard positioned himself between Tommy and the exits, how he corrected the boy's posture and mannerisms, how his smile never quite reached his eyes when Tommy spoke about missing his real daddy. "Richard," Cole said, emerging from the kitchen with his hand extended. "Good to finally meet you." Richard shook Cole's hand with the firm grip of a surgeon, probably trying to establish dominance through physical pressure. Cole returned the grip with precisely calibrated force. Not enough to start a confrontation, but sufficient to demonstrate that he wasn't intimidated. "Cole, Linda's told me so much about you." Richard's voice carried the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "Thank you for your service. It must be difficult being away from family for so long." "It is," Cole agreed, "but I always come home." Eventually, dinner proceeded with the surface politeness of a diplomatic negotiation. Linda tried to fill the silence with nervous chatter about Tommy's school and her work at the hospital. Richard regaled them with stories about his surgical successes and his plans to expand his practice. Cole asked thoughtful questions and made appropriate responses, all while studying his enemy with the focused attention of a sniper calculating wind speed and distance. After Tommy was sent to bed, the 3 adults sat in the living room with wine, expensive wine that Richard had brought, naturally. "I appreciate you being understanding about this situation," Richard said, settling back in the leather chair he'd obviously chosen for himself. "These things are always awkward, but I think we can work something out that's best for everyone." "What did you have in mind?" Cole asked. Richard exchanged a glance with Linda. "Well, Linda and I have been discussing the future. We're thinking about taking things to the next level, maybe getting a place together, giving Tommy some stability." "A place together," Cole repeated. "Richard's been looking at houses in West Des Moines," Linda added quickly. "Better schools for Tommy, closer to the hospital for both of our jobs." "I see." Cole sipped his wine and nodded thoughtfully. "And where do I fit into this plan?" Richard leaned forward with the practiced earnestness of a man who'd had this conversation before. "Look, Cole, I respect what you've done for this country, but you've been gone for 18 months and life doesn't stop. Linda and Tommy have built a new normal, and forcing change just because you're back might not be what's best for the boy. You think what's best for Tommy is living with a man who leaves bruises on him?" The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I don't know what you think you've seen," Richard said carefully, "but children get bumps and bruises. It's part of growing up. Maybe if you'd been here, you'd understand that." Cole stood up slowly, and Richard instinctively tensed. "I think," Cole said quietly, "that you and I need to have a private conversation, man to man." Linda started to protest, but Cole's look silenced her. Richard hesitated, then stood as well, probably figuring that backing down would make him look weak in front of Linda. "After you," Cole said, gesturing toward the back door. The 2 men walked out into the Iowa darkness, where the real conversation was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Confrontation. The barn behind Cole's house had been built in the 1940s, solid timber construction that had weathered decades of Iowa storms. Cole had converted part of it into a workshop when they first bought the property, installing soundproof insulation because he liked to work on projects late at night without disturbing the neighbors. Tonight, that soundproofing would serve a different purpose. Nice setup, Richard said, looking around at the workbenches and tools. Very thorough. Cole closed the barn door behind them and turned on the overhead lights. I like to be prepared for any situation. Richard had clearly expected some kind of confrontation, but he was still operating under civilian assumptions about how such things worked. He probably thought Cole would make threats, maybe push him around a little, then they'd reach some kind of masculine understanding and go back inside. Richard had no idea he was locked in a soundproof room with a man who'd spent 4 combat tours learning that sometimes violence was the only language certain people understood. Look, Cole, Richard began, using the reasonable tone he'd probably perfected during medical school. I understand you're upset about the situation with Linda, but we're both adults here, and we both want what's best for Tommy. What's best for Tommy? Cole repeated, moving to his workbench and picking up a ball-peen hammer, testing its weight. Tell me, Richard, in your professional medical opinion, what's best for a 5-year-old who's been systematically abused by his mother's boyfriend? Richard's eyes flicked to the hammer, then back to Cole's face. That's a serious accusation. I hope you're prepared to back it up with evidence. Cole set down the hammer and pulled out his phone, showing Richard the photographs he'd taken of Tommy's bruises. Finger marks on his arms. Black eye that's healing wrong, probably because no one took him to get it properly examined. Behavioral changes consistent with trauma. Children get injured. Tommy's been acting out since you deployed, and sometimes physical correction is necessary for dash. Physical correction. Cole's voice remained perfectly calm. Is that what you call it when you grab a 5-year-old hard enough to leave bruises? Richard straightened, trying to regain control of the conversation. I've been more of a father to that boy in the last year than you've been in his entire life. Someone had to teach him discipline and respect. By terrorizing him. By preparing him for the real world. Linda was too soft, turning him into a weak, whining mama's boy. I've been toughening him up, teaching him what it means to be a man. Cole studied Richard's face in the harsh fluorescent light. And what does it mean to be a man, Richard? It means taking what you want instead of waiting for someone to give it to you. It means not letting people disrespect you, especially children who need to learn their place. Richard's mask was slipping further, revealing the predator underneath. It means having the courage to step in when weak men abandon their responsibilities. Weak men, Cole mused, like soldiers who deploy to serve their country. Like soldiers who choose wars over their families, then act surprised when their families move on without them. Cole nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the point. You know, Richard, you're right about one thing. Tommy does need to learn what it means to be a man. But I think we have different definitions. Enlighten me. Cole moved to another workbench and picked up a pair of heavy-duty zip ties, the kind used in law enforcement and military applications. A real man protects children. Richard, he doesn't hurt them. Richard's eyes widened as he finally understood that this wasn't going to be a civilized conversation. Now wait just a minute, Dash. A real man keeps his promises to his family. He doesn't prey on vulnerable women and their children. Richard backed toward the door, but Cole had positioned himself between Richard and the exit. Cole, let's think about this rationally. If you do something stupid, you'll go to prison. Tommy will lose both father figures. Tommy's not going to lose his father figure, Cole said quietly. He's going to lose the man who's been abusing him. Richard lunged for the door, but Cole had expected that. 18 months of combat had honed his reflexes to a razor's edge. He caught Richard by the shoulder and spun him around, using the man's momentum to drive him face first into the barn wall. You see, Richard, Cole said conversationally as he zip-tied Richard's hands behind his back, the thing about being a soldier is that you learn to identify threats, and you learn to neutralize them. Richard tried to struggle, but Cole had been trained by experts in restraint and control. Within 30 seconds, Richard was secured to a support beam, unable to move, but perfectly able to see and hear everything that was about to happen. Please, Richard gasped. This is insane. You can't just dash. Can't what? Protect my son from a predator. Cole pulled up a chair and sat down facing his prisoner. Tell me, Richard, how many other children have you disciplined over the years? I don't know what you're talking about. Cole pulled out his phone and showed Richard the research he'd compiled. Jennifer Martinez, your ex-wife, divorced you after you repeatedly abused her 7-year-old nephew during family visits. She was going to press charges until you made her a financial offer she couldn't refuse. Richard's face went pale. That was a misunderstanding. The boy was troubled, needed firm guidance. Sarah Chun, you dated her for 8 months, moved in with her and her twin daughters. The girls started having nightmares and behavioral problems until Sarah's sister convinced her to get them into therapy. The therapist found signs of systematic emotional abuse. You're fishing. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove anything, Richard. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm a father. Cole leaned forward. How long have you been targeting single mothers with young children? Richard stared at Cole with growing terror as he realized this wasn't going to end with a beating and a warning. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure you never hurt another child again. If you kill me, they'll know it was you. Linda saw us come out here together. Cole smiled, the same cold smile that had preceded some of his most successful operations in Afghanistan. Who said anything about killing you, Richard? That would be too easy, too quick. Over the next 2 hours, Cole demonstrated the advanced interrogation techniques he'd learned in military intelligence school. He didn't need to extract information. He already had all the evidence he required. But he wanted Richard to understand exactly how helpless Tommy had felt during months of systematic abuse. When Cole was finished, Richard was broken in ways that would never fully heal. Not dead, but destroyed. And most importantly, he would never be capable of hurting another child again. Cole cleaned up the barn with military precision, erasing any evidence of what had transpired. Then he loaded Richard's unconscious body into the man's own Porsche and drove to a location he'd scouted earlier that day. The abandoned quarry outside Cedar Falls had been closed for 15 years, its access roads overgrown and forgotten. Cole positioned the Porsche at the edge of the quarry, put the car in neutral, and gave it a push. The vehicle rolled down the steep embankment and plunged into the black water with barely a splash. Within minutes, the only evidence was ripples on the surface that would be gone by morning. Cole walked the 3 miles back to his house, taking rural roads where no security cameras would record his passage. When he arrived home at 2 a.m., Linda was waiting in the kitchen. Where have you been? Richard left hours ago without saying goodbye, and I've been calling his phone all night. We had a long talk, Cole said simply. I don't think you'll be hearing from Richard anymore. Something in Cole's tone made Linda step backward. What do you mean? I mean, Richard and I reached an understanding about his future involvement with our family. Cole poured himself a glass of water and met his wife's frightened eyes. There won't be any. Chapter 5, The Unraveling. 3 days passed before anyone officially noticed Richard Hawthorne was missing. The hospital called Linda when he failed to show up for surgery, but his colleagues assumed he'd taken emergency leave or been called away on a family matter. Richard had always been a loner, the type of man who didn't form close friendships or maintain regular contact with family members. Linda, meanwhile, was slowly falling apart. She tried calling Richard's phone every few hours for the first 2 days, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. She'd driven by his apartment, finding his mail piling up and his BMW still in the parking lot. When she tried to file a missing person report, the police told her she'd have to wait 48 hours for an adult who might have simply decided to leave town. Cole watched his wife's deterioration with the same clinical detachment he'd once used to observe enemy positions through a sniper scope. Linda couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on basic tasks. She jumped at every sound and constantly checked her phone for messages that never came. Something's happened to him, she told Cole on Thursday morning, her voice shaking. Richard would never just disappear without telling me. We had plans. We were going to look at houses this weekend. Maybe he changed his mind, Cole suggested reasonably. You said yourself that men sometimes leave even when they promise to stay. I think those were Richard's words, actually. Linda stared at her husband, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You did something to him. I talked to him. Like I said, what kind of talk makes a man disappear? Cole buttered his toast with deliberate precision, the kind where two men reach an understanding about their priorities. Richard's priorities apparently don't include Iowa anymore. Linda slammed her coffee cup down hard enough to crack the ceramic. Stop talking in riddles. What happened in that barn? We discussed Tommy's future. Richard agreed that what the boy needs is stability and consistency, not someone who might disappear when things get complicated. Cole looked up at his wife with eyes that held no warmth. Turns out Richard is exactly the kind of man who disappears when things get complicated. The fear in Linda's face was replaced by something colder. You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming back here and taking charge like some kind of avenging angel. I think I'm a father who protects his son. From what? From a man who actually cared enough to be here when Tommy needed a father figure. Cole set down his knife and studied his wife with the same intensity he'd once reserved for identifying insurgent activity. Is that what you call it when Richard grabbed Tommy hard enough to leave bruises? Caring. Richard was trying to teach Tommy respect and discipline, something you clearly never bothered with. And the black eye? Was that a lesson in respect too? Linda's composure cracked. Tommy fell off his bike. I told you that. Show me the bike, Linda. What? Show me Tommy's bike. The one he allegedly crashed hard enough to blacken his eye. Cole's voice remained perfectly calm. Or better yet, show me the medical records from when you took him to the emergency room for a head injury. Linda's face went white. Richard examined him. He said it wasn't serious enough for the hospital. Richard examined his own victim and determined the injury wasn't serious enough to create an official record. Cole nodded slowly. How convenient. You don't understand the pressure I was under, Linda said desperately. 18 months of wondering if you were coming home, trying to hold everything together, raising Tommy alone. You weren't alone, Linda. You had family, friends, a support network through the military. You chose Richard instead. I chose someone who was actually here. Cole studied his wife's face and saw something that made him profoundly sad. Not guilt about the affair, not remorse about endangering Tommy, not even fear about Richard's disappearance. Linda was angry that her comfortable arrangement had been disrupted. You chose someone who paid for your BMW and your jewelry and your shopping trips, Cole said quietly. And when that someone started hurting our son, you allowed it because the money was more important than Tommy's safety. Linda's face flushed with fury. How dare you judge me? You abandoned us to go play war hero on the other side of the world. You left me to deal with everything alone. I served my country. There's a difference. You served your ego. You could have taken a non-deployment assignment, but you chose to leave because playing soldier was more important than being a husband and father. Cole absorbed the accusation without reaction. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have been here. He stood up from the table. But I'm here now, and things are going to change. What's that supposed to mean? It means you have a choice to make, Linda. You can be Tommy's mother or my wife, or you can keep looking for Richard and whatever he represented. But you can't do both. Linda laughed bitterly. You think you can just snap your fingers and everything goes back to the way it was? That I'll forget about the last year and pretend to be your grateful little military wife again. I think you'll decide what's more important, your family or your fantasy. My fantasy? My fantasy was having a partner who didn't disappear for months at a time. My fantasy was having someone who helped with Tommy instead of just sending money and calling once a week. My fantasy was a normal life. Cole looked at his wife for a long moment, seeing clearly for the first time the woman she'd become in his absence. Or perhaps the woman she'd always been, and he'd simply been too young and too much in love to recognize it. Then I guess we want different things, he said finally. That afternoon, while Linda was at work, Cole received a visit from Detective Sarah Morrison of the Cedar Falls Police Department. She was a compact woman in her 40s with the confident bearing of someone who'd seen enough to be surprised by very little. Mr. Brennan? I'm investigating a missing person report filed yesterday. Dr. Richard Hawthorne. I understand you know him. Cole invited her into the living room and offered coffee, which she declined. I met Richard recently. He's been dating my wife while I was deployed overseas. How recently did you meet him? Monday evening. I returned from Afghanistan on Monday. Found him in my house. Detective Morrison made notes without comment. How did that go? Meeting your wife's boyfriend, as well as you'd expect. Cole's tone held just the right amount of rueful humor. Awkward situation for everyone involved. Did you and Dr. Hawthorne argue? We had a conversation about boundaries and expectations. He'd been living in my house, around my son, making decisions about my family. I wanted to understand the situation. What was the result of that conversation? Cole shrugged. I think we both understood each other better. Richard realized that my return changed the dynamic, and I realized that some situations can't be resolved through compromise. When was the last time you saw Dr. Hawthorne? Monday night. He left around 10:30, said he had early surgery the next morning. Detective Morrison studied Cole's face. Your wife seems very concerned about his disappearance. She thinks something might have happened to him. Linda's emotionally invested in Richard. When someone you care about disappears suddenly, it's natural to assume the worst rather than accept that they might have simply chosen to leave. You think Dr. Hawthorne chose to leave? I think Richard found himself in a complicated situation and decided the smart move was to extract himself before things got messy. Cole met the detective's eyes directly. Some men are good at walking away when the costs outweigh the benefits. Detective Morrison closed her notebook. If Dr. Hawthorne contacts you or your wife, please let me know immediately. Of course. After the detective left, Cole checked on Tommy, who was playing in his room with the expensive toys Richard had bought him. His son looked up when Cole appeared in the doorway. Daddy? Is Uncle Richard coming back? No, buddy. Uncle Richard decided to move away. Tommy considered this for a moment. Good, he said simply, then returned to his toys. That evening, Linda came home from work more agitated than Cole had ever seen her. She'd been questioned by the police, called by Richard's colleagues, contacted by his apartment manager about unpaid rent. They're asking questions about you, she told Cole. About what you and Richard discussed, about whether you threatened him. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That you're a trained killer who came home to find another man in his house. Cole looked at his wife with something approaching pity. Linda, do you really think I'm stupid enough to threaten someone in front of witnesses, then make him disappear 3 days later? I think you're smart enough to make it look like an accident. If I wanted Richard dead, Linda, he'd be dead. But killing him would serve no purpose. Dead martyrs sometimes become more powerful than living problems. Linda stared at her husband, trying to read the truth behind his calm exterior. What did you do to him? I convinced him that his future lay elsewhere. Ow! Cole smiled the cold smile that Linda was beginning to fear. I reminded him that some men are predators, and some men are apex predators. I let him choose which category he wanted to be in. That doesn't make sense. It made sense to Richard. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. 2 weeks after Richard Hawthorne's disappearance, the police investigation stalled. Security cameras showed Richard's Porsche leaving his apartment complex on Monday night, but the vehicle had vanished without a trace. His bank accounts remained untouched, his phone went straight to voicemail, and no one could find any evidence that he'd planned to leave town. Detective Morrison interviewed Cole twice more, each time trying to break through his calm, reasonable demeanor. But Cole had been trained by experts in psychological warfare. He answered every question truthfully while revealing nothing that could implicate him in any wrongdoing. The thing is, Mr. Brennan, Detective Morrison said during their final interview, most people in your situation would show some emotion. Anger about the affair, concern about Dr. Hawthorne's welfare, something. You seem remarkably balanced about the whole situation. 18 months in a combat zone teaches you emotional control, detective. Getting angry about things you can't change is a luxury soldiers can't afford. And you can't change the fact that your wife was having an affair? I can't change the past. I can only influence the future. Detective Morrison studied Cole's military record, his combat commendations, his psychological evaluations. Everything indicated a stable, highly trained professional with no history of violence outside of military operations. Without physical evidence linking him to Richard's disappearance, she had no choice but to close the active investigation. Linda, meanwhile, was slowly coming apart. She'd taken leave from the hospital, unable to concentrate on her patients while Richard remained missing. She spent hours calling his friends and colleagues, searching social media for any sign that he'd resurfaced somewhere else. Cole watched his wife's deterioration with the same clinical interest he'd once applied to studying enemy behavior patterns. Linda was experiencing the psychological consequences of living with uncertainty, not knowing whether Richard was dead, injured. "You could end this," she told Cole one evening as he read reports about military contractor opportunities. "You could tell me what really happened to him. I told you what happened. We talked, and he decided to leave Iowa." People don't just vanish, Cole. There are always traces, always evidence. Sometimes the evidence just hasn't been found yet. Linda studied her husband's profile in the lamplight. "You've changed. You're different than you were before you deployed. War changes people, Linda. That's why they call it a combat zone instead of a vacation resort. It's more than that. You're colder, harder, like you don't feel things the way you used to." Cole looked up from his reading. "Maybe I just have different priorities now. Maybe seeing real evil makes you less tolerant of smaller evils." Richard wasn't evil. He was just flawed. Richard was a predator who systematically abused our son while you looked the other way because he paid for your BMW. Linda's face flushed. "That's not fair." "Fair." Cole set down his papers and looked at his wife directly. Was it fair when Tommy flinched every time an adult moved too quickly? Was it fair when he started wetting the bed because he was afraid to ask for help during the night? Was it fair when he drew pictures of his new daddy because you told him he had to pretend Richard was his father? I was trying to give Tommy stability. You were trying to justify your choices by convincing yourself they were good for Tommy. Linda stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. You weren't here, Cole. You don't know what it was like." "You're right. I wasn't here. But I'm here now, and I know what I found when I came home." "What you found was a family that had learned to survive without you." Cole nodded slowly. "And what you found when I came back was a man who wouldn't tolerate his son being abused by his wife's boyfriend." Linda stared at her husband, finally understanding that the conversation they'd been having for weeks was really about much more than Richard's disappearance. "What do you want from me, Cole? I want you to decide who you are, Linda. Are you Tommy's mother, who puts his safety and well-being above everything else? Or are you the woman who let her boyfriend abuse her son because the money was too good to give up? Those aren't the only two options. In my world, they are." Linda sat back down, looking suddenly exhausted. "And if I can't be the person you want me to be, then you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." "What consequences?" Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Linda shiver. The same consequences that applied to Richard when he chose to continue hurting Tommy despite having opportunities to stop. That night, Linda lay awake beside her husband, finally understanding that she was sleeping next to a man who'd been fundamentally changed by 18 months of combat. The boy she'd married was gone, replaced by someone who viewed the world in terms of threats and targets, problems and solutions. For the first time since Richard's disappearance, Linda began to fear for her own safety. Chapter 7. The Choice. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, when Linda discovered Cole's evidence files. She'd been searching his belongings for clues about Richard's disappearance, driven by a combination of grief and morbid curiosity. In Cole's duffel bag, hidden beneath military clothing, she found a waterproof folder containing detailed documentation of everything she'd done during his deployment. Photographs of her jewelry and designer clothes. Copies of credit card statements showing expenditures far beyond their budget. Screenshots of text messages between her and Richard. Bank records revealing deposits from Richard's account into hers. Most damning of all, printed copies of the email drafts where Linda had documented Tommy's abuse but done nothing to stop it. Linda sat on their bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of her own choices, and realized that Cole had known everything from the moment he returned home. The conversations they'd had, his apparent acceptance of the situation, his reasonable requests to meet Richard, all of it had been an act while he gathered intelligence and planned his response. When Cole found her there an hour later, Linda was still holding the photographs of Tommy's bruises. "How long have you known?" she asked without looking up. "Since the first day I came home. And you said nothing. I wanted to give you a chance to tell me yourself." to show some remorse for what you'd allowed to happen to Tommy. Linda finally met his eyes, and when I didn't, I knew what kind of person I was dealing with. Linda stood up slowly, still clutching the evidence of her son's abuse. What kind of person am I, Cole? You're the kind of person who reads these emails about Tommy being hurt and does nothing to protect him. You're the kind of person who accepts money from the man abusing your child because the lifestyle is more important than the child's safety. I was trying to survive. No, Linda, you were trying to upgrade. Linda looked at the photographs again. Clear images of finger-shaped bruises on Tommy's small arms, the black eye that had been dismissed as a bicycle accident, the fearful expression of a child who'd learned not to trust the adults who were supposed to protect him. What happened to Richard? She asked finally. Richard made choices. He chose to hurt our son repeatedly. He chose to manipulate you into accepting that abuse. He chose to continue that behavior even after I returned and made it clear that it wouldn't be tolerated. So you killed him. Cole's expression didn't change. I eliminated a threat to my son's safety. That's what fathers do when the system fails to protect their children. Linda felt something cold settle in her stomach. And what happens to me? I'm a threat to Tommy's safety too, aren't I? I enabled Richard. I chose money over my son's well-being. Cole studied his wife's face, seeing for the first time what might have been genuine remorse. That depends. On what? On whether you're capable of becoming the mother Tommy deserves, or whether you're always going to be the woman who traded her child's safety for a BMW. Linda looked around their bedroom, at the expensive clothes in the closet, the jewelry on the dresser, the evidence of all the choices she'd made while Cole was overseas defending their country. I don't know how to come back from this, she said quietly. Most people don't, but some do. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Some people are capable of genuine change when they finally understand the full consequences of their actions. Some people aren't. How do I know which kind I am? You prove it through actions, not words. Richard was excellent with words. Linda, he could justify anything, explain away any behavior, convince you that black was white if it served his purposes. Linda set down the photographs and looked directly at her husband. What would proving it look like? It would look like putting Tommy's needs first every single time for the rest of his childhood. It would look like accepting responsibility for the choices you made instead of blaming circumstances or other people. It would look like earning back the trust you destroyed. And if I can't do that, Cole's eyes held the same cold certainty that had convinced Richard Hawthorne to reconsider his life choices. Then you'll join Richard in making a fresh start somewhere else. Linda understood that this wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. Cole had eliminated one threat to Tommy's safety and was prepared to eliminate another if necessary. I want to try, she said. I want to be better. Wanting isn't enough, Linda. Richard wanted things too. Then what is enough? Cole picked up one of the photographs showing Tommy's bruised arms. Proving that you love our son more than you love anything Richard gave you. Proving that you'd rather have Tommy safe and happy in a modest house than rich and traumatized in a mansion. Linda looked around their bedroom again, mentally cataloging everything that Richard's money had bought. The BMW goes back. The BMW was never yours to keep. The jewelry, the clothes, everything. Material possessions were never the real problem. Linda, the real problem was what you were willing to tolerate to keep them. Linda nodded, finally understanding the choice Cole was presenting. And if I prove that I've changed, if I become the mother Tommy deserves, then you'll be his mother and my wife. And we'll never speak about Richard Hawthorne again. And if I can't, Cole's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Then you'll discover that there are consequences for people who endanger children, regardless of their relationship to those children. Linda met her husband's eyes and saw her future laid out in stark terms. She could choose to be the woman who protected Tommy above all else, or she could join Richard in whatever fate Cole had arranged for people who threatened his son's safety. For the first time since Richard's disappearance, Linda's choice was completely clear. Chapter 8. The Test. Linda's redemption began with small gestures that Cole observed with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to tracking enemy movement patterns. She returned the BMW to the dealership, taking a significant financial loss to break the lease early. The expensive jewelry went back to the stores where Richard had bought it, most of it still within the return period. Designer clothes were donated to charity or sold online. But Cole knew that anyone could get rid of material possessions. The real test was how Linda behaved with Tommy. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Linda began spending actual time with her son instead of just managing his schedule. She helped with homework instead of hiring tutors. She read bedtime stories instead of letting Tommy fall asleep watching television. Most importantly, she started paying attention to Tommy's emotional state instead of just his surface behavior. "Mommy," Tommy said one evening as Linda tucked him into bed, "are you sad about Uncle Richard going away?" Linda considered her answer carefully. "I'm sad that I didn't pay closer attention to how Uncle Richard made you feel, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they think they know what's best." "I didn't like Uncle Richard very much," Tommy admitted quietly. "I know, baby, and I should have listened to you better. He said I wasn't allowed to talk about the things that made me scared." Linda felt her heart break a little more. "You can always talk to Mommy and Daddy about things that scare you. That's what we're here for." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Daddy said the same thing. He said nobody's allowed to hurt me or tell me to keep secrets about being hurt." "Daddy's right. Will you and Daddy promise not to go away anymore?" Linda looked into her son's earnest face and made the first completely honest commitment she'd made in months. "I promise to always be here when you need me, Tommy. Always." Cole, listening from the hallway, noted that Linda hadn't promised they'd never go away. She'd promised to always be there when Tommy needed her. It was a more honest answer than the blanket reassurance most parents would have given. The second test came when Detective Morrison made a follow-up visit 6 weeks after Richard's disappearance. "Mrs. Brennan," the detective said, "I wanted to let you know that we're officially classifying Dr. Hawthorne's case as a missing person with no evidence of foul play. Without additional leads, we won't be conducting further active investigation." Linda looked appropriately disappointed, but not devastated. "Do you think he just left?" "It's the most likely explanation. Dr. Hawthorne had no close family ties, significant debts he might have been avoiding, and a history of ending relationships abruptly when they became complicated." A history. Detective Morrison glanced at Cole, then back to Linda. "We spoke with his ex-wife during our investigation. She indicated that Dr. Hawthorne had a pattern of moving on quickly when situations didn't work out in his favor." Linda absorbed this information with visible surprise. "He never mentioned being married before. Some people don't like to discuss their failures, Mrs. Brennan. It's possible that your husband's return simply reminded Dr. Hawthorne that he was in an untenable situation." After the detective left, Linda turned to Cole with a thoughtful expression. She made it sound like Richard had done this before. Gotten involved with women and then disappeared when things got complicated. People rarely change their fundamental nature, Linda. They just find new situations to repeat old patterns. "But you knew about his ex-wife, didn't you? You researched him." Cole nodded. "I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. And what you found convinced you that Richard was dangerous to Tommy. What I found confirmed what I already knew from looking at our son's bruises." Linda was quiet for a moment. "If Richard was a predator who targeted vulnerable women with children, then I wasn't special to him. I was just convenient. You were a means to an end. Richard's end was having access to a child he could control and abuse." Linda looked at her husband with something approaching gratitude. "You saved Tommy from a monster. I protected my son from a threat. That's what parents do." The final test came 2 months later when Tommy started having nightmares again. But instead of the terror-filled dreams about monsters that had plagued him during Richard's presence, these were more typical childhood fears about school and friends and growing up. Linda handled the nightmares with patience and attention, sitting with Tommy until he fell back asleep, talking through his worries instead of dismissing them. Cole watched his wife demonstrate the kind of maternal instincts she'd suppressed during her relationship with Richard. "She's getting better," Cole told himself one night as he watched Linda comfort their son. "She's remembering how to be his mother." But the real proof came when Tommy asked the question Cole had been waiting for. "Daddy? Mommy? Are you going to get a divorce like Billy's parents?" Cole and Linda exchanged glances across the kitchen table. They'd been working toward this conversation for months, but hearing it from Tommy's own lips made the moment more significant. "Why do you ask, buddy?" Cole said gently. "Because you and Mommy act different now. Not like you used to before you went away." Linda reached over and took Tommy's small hand. "Mommy and Daddy are working on being better parents to you, sweetheart. Sometimes that means we have to change how we do things. But you're not going to leave?" Cole looked at his wife, giving her the opportunity to answer first. "I'm never going anywhere again, Tommy," Linda said firmly. "I made some mistakes while Daddy was away, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much I love you." Tommy turned to Cole. "What about you, Daddy?" "I'm not going anywhere either, buddy. My job now is taking care of you and Mommy." Tommy seemed satisfied with these answers, but he had one more question that proved he was more perceptive than either parent had realized. "What about Uncle Richard? Is he ever coming back?" Cole and Linda looked at each other, and Linda gave an almost imperceptible nod. "No, Tommy," Cole said quietly. "Uncle Richard is never coming back, and no one like him will ever be around our family again." "Good," Tommy said simply. "I like it better when it's just us." That night, after Tommy was asleep, Cole and Linda sat together on their front porch in the Iowa darkness. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Linda asked. "Long term, I mean, after everything that happened." "Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved," Cole replied. "Tommy feels safe now. Because of what you did to Richard. Because Richard is gone and can never hurt him again." Linda was quiet for a moment. "I'll never know exactly what happened in that barn, will I? Do you want to know?" Linda considered the question seriously. "I think I want to know that Tommy is safe. I think that's all I really need to know." Cole nodded. "Tommy is safe, and he'll stay safe. What about us? Are we going to be okay?" Cole looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time since coming home. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by the practical outfits of a woman who put function over fashion. The expensive jewelry had been replaced by her original wedding ring and a simple watch. Most importantly, the calculating look that had appeared during her relationship with Richard was gone, replaced by something that looked like the woman Cole had married years before. "I think," Cole said carefully, "that we're going to be exactly what we choose to be." Chapter 9. The New Normal. 1 year later, the Brennan family had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and completely different from their life before Cole's deployment. They'd moved to a smaller house closer to town, partly for financial reasons after Linda returned Richard's expensive gifts, but mostly because Cole wanted neighbors close enough to hear if anyone ever threatened his family again. Cole had taken a job with a private security firm that allowed him to work locally instead of deploying overseas. The pay was good, the work was challenging, and most importantly, he was home every night for dinner. Linda had returned to full-time nursing, finding satisfaction in work that felt meaningful after months of shopping and lunching while Richard paid her bills. Tommy was thriving in first grade, showing the kind of confidence and happiness that had been missing during Richard's presence in their lives. He no longer flinched when adults moved quickly, no longer wet the bed, no longer drew pictures of new daddies. His teacher had noted significant improvement in his behavior and academic performance. Detective Morrison closed Richard Hawthorne's missing person case after 18 months with no new leads. His apartment had been cleaned out by the landlord, his medical practice had been dissolved, and his few possessions had been auctioned to pay outstanding debts. For all practical purposes, Richard Hawthorne had simply ceased to exist. Cole occasionally wondered if anyone would ever find the Porsche in the abandoned quarry, but the chances seemed slim. The quarry was deep, isolated, and scheduled to be filled in as part of the county development project. Even if the car was eventually discovered, any evidence linking it to Cole would have been long since destroyed by time and water. On a warm Saturday evening in late spring, Cole was teaching Tommy to play catch in their backyard when his son asked a question that stopped him cold. "Daddy, what happened to the bad man who used to live with us?" Cole had been expecting this conversation for months, but hearing it still made his stomach tighten. "What bad man, buddy?" "Uncle Richard. I know he was bad because he hurt me and made Mommy sad." Cole knelt down at Tommy's eye level. "What do you remember about Uncle Richard?" Tommy scrunched up his face in concentration. He had angry eyes, and he grabbed too hard. And he said I couldn't tell anyone about the grabbing because it would make Mommy cry. That's right. Uncle Richard was a bad man who hurt you and tried to make you keep secrets about being hurt. But he went away, right? You made him go away. Cole studied his son's face, seeing not fear or confusion, but the simple need for confirmation that the threat was gone. Yes, Tommy. I made sure Uncle Richard went away and can never hurt you again. Good. I told Billy at school that my daddy gets rid of bad guys because he's a soldier. What did Billy say? He said that's what daddies are supposed to do. Cole pulled his son into a hug, marveling at the straightforward logic of children. Tommy didn't need details about what had happened to Richard. He just needed to know that his father was capable of protecting him from monsters. That's right, buddy. That's exactly what daddies are supposed to do. Linda appeared in the backyard doorway, watching father and son with an expression of profound contentment. The guilt she'd carried for months had gradually transformed into gratitude, not for what Cole had done to Richard, but for what he'd saved Tommy from experiencing. Dinner's ready, she called out. As they walked inside together, Tommy skipping between his parents, Linda caught Cole's hand and squeezed it gently. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For bringing our family back. Cole squeezed her hand in return. We brought it back together. That night, after Tommy was asleep and Linda was reading in bed, Cole sat in his home office reviewing security protocols for a new client. The work was satisfying in ways that military service had never been. Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, using his skills to prevent harm rather than cause it. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, saw the news about Richard Hawthorne. Good riddance. He did the same thing to my sister's kids. Thank you. JM. Cole stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. He'd known there were other victims, other families Richard had damaged. But Cole's mission had been simple and specific: protect Tommy. The fact that eliminating Richard had prevented future victims was a side benefit, not the primary objective. 3 houses down the street, he could see the Hendersons putting their young daughter to bed, backlit in their bedroom window. Next door, the Johnsons were watching television while their twin boys played video games. Normal families living normal lives, unaware that a predator who might have targeted their children had been permanently removed from the equation. Cole closed his laptop and walked upstairs to check on Tommy one last time before bed. His son was sleeping peacefully, surrounded by age-appropriate toys and books, secure in the knowledge that the adults in his life would protect him from anything that might threaten his safety. As Cole watched his son sleep, he reflected on the choices that had brought them to this point. Linda had chosen material comfort over her child's welfare, then chosen to change when presented with the consequences of that decision. Richard had chosen to prey on vulnerable families, then faced the ultimate consequence when he encountered a father who wouldn't tolerate threats to his child. Cole had chosen to eliminate a threat to his son's safety, and he'd do it again without hesitation if necessary. Some people might call him a killer, but Cole knew what he really was: a father who took his responsibility seriously. In the end, that was all that mattered. Tommy was safe. Linda had become the mother their son deserved, and their family had been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty instead of deception. The nightmares were over, and they would never return. Because some promises, once made, are kept regardless of cost. And Cole Brennan always kept his promises. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.